Good afternoon and welcome to the Calix webinar. The game is not over. Keep subscribers engaged after the install. I'm Susan Friedman from Calix. Before we get started, here's a few tips on using the Zoom console and how you can engage with us during the webinar. At the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbar. Click on the Q&A button to ask our panelists questions. Use the chat button for technical issues, or if you would like to share your thoughts and reactions to the conversation. Under the Resources button, you'll find speaker bios and links to additional information. During the webinar, we will have a few poll questions. Thank you for your participation in these polls. They help us shape the conversation. Today's session is being recorded. The replay link will be sent to all registrants. And with that, I'll hand it over to Manny, who will introduce you to our speakers. Manny, let's get started.
Hey, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So today in this webinar, we'll explore how broadband businesses like SE Telecom are using proven strategies and innovative tools to deliver continuous value throughout the subscriber lifecycle. We dive into how insights we may already have can help keep customers connected and engaged long after activation. And honestly, as a former BSP marketing and sales leader, I think many of us are very comfortable with getting to install. We'll discuss what happens after install, what impact that has on the business, and as well as a plan to ensure that you can succeed in engaging them past, in 30, 60, 90 to even a year after installation. We have, excited to introduce our line of speakers today. Me myself, if we want to go to the next slide, we can visually see who's speaking. You have Joe Kohagi, a director of customer engagement and subscriber marketing. We're bringing along Wendy Krenner, director of marketing and brand awareness at SC Telecom. Then myself, Manny Arguez, senior solutions marketing manager for Calix. And with that, I'm excited to hand things over to Joe Kohagi to kick things off.
All right. Thanks, Manny. Thanks, everyone, for attending today. This great, exciting topic, something that, like Manny, is near and dear to my heart, and hopefully something that you'll be able to take away from today with some really actionable next steps on how you can extend your value with your subscribers beyond that initial installation. And frankly, as you're going to see in some of the details we're about to share, that's really where the game begins. Installation ends, you did your acquisition campaigns, and now that's where subscriber experience really starts to come to life. And if we're not in that conversation with customers and bringing them through a life cycle of communications, our outcomes aren't going to be as good. We're going to have some risks in the pipeline, frankly, from a churn perspective. And we're going to share all that today. So we're really looking forward to this topic. So be active, ask questions. We're here to answer, and really try to give some tangible next steps for you as you come out of it. So with that said, let's get into it. Like Manny mentioned, I too come from a service provider, and admittedly, we were very good at running acquisition campaigns and going through that whole process of, basically setting up initial funnel to get folks access to the internet. That would kick off the service order. CSRs would work that down. Scheduling would take place, whether that was a brand net new install that required a drop, or if it was a turn up of an existing home that had a drop, and we just needed to get them going with managed Wi-Fi, etc. We were fantastic at being able to deliver that right up to the point of the customer going live, turning it up. But the problem is, that's actually the end of what we did, but it's actually the start of your customer's experience with you. Yes, they had an experience on your web. Yes, they may have called in to talk to a CSR. That's part of the initial, hey, I need service. But where the rubber meets the road is really everything that takes place post-installation. So we think this topic is super important. And one of the main reasons it's important is that there's an underlying level of churn that takes place after the installation, and it doesn't take very long. And most providers who don't have a strategy for a post-installation engagement plan are at this risk. And as you can see, there's a lot of service providers who are not orchestrating post-installation journeys in any way, shape, or form. Only 16% of the service providers that we talk to really have a deep strategy for customer experience post-installation. That's not good. That's not great. We need that number to be much higher because look, the first 90 to 120 days really decides the relationship. It really decides what perception you have in the minds of those customers. And that first 90 to 120 days is where 15% of your annual churn comes from. So some of you may have low churn on a monthly basis, but annualize that, we see it anywhere between 10 and 15%, with the vast majority of it sitting right in that 90-day window. So it's super critical. And here's the big one. If they were having problems, they would tell us about it. Not true. Silent churn is a massive risk for your subscribers. We found that 70% of all subscribers who churn in that window actually never made a call to your contact center. They never raised their hand and saying help. They suffered in silence and then they walked away. So this sort of frames the imperative for y'all to start looking at what can I do after the installation to change this so I can drive my numbers higher, so I can keep these customers longer, and I can continue to grow the business and provide a fantastic experience and take advantage of all the benefits of that downstream. So our business insight services team here at Calix have been doing some really, really amazing work in terms of understanding NPS, and they've coined something called the honeymoon effect. And what they've found is that NPS scores on the front end, when measured after the installation, are typically actually really, really high. Most customers are very happy to have service. Like that's the first thing. But what we found that unless there's proactive value reinforcement over the course of 2 years, NPS starts to drop precipitously. And so, we think that this is really important to take into consideration as you're looking to implement strategies to keep your customers long tail. So you can see here, this is some of the numbers. These are aggregate numbers, post installation, NPS of, 67. After that 2-year mark, it starts to drop. And so why this all matters? It's costing you money. It's costing you churn. It's taking your cost of acquisition for a customer that you work so dang hard for and may have cost you, like some folks I know, $300, $500, $700 per new acquisition, depending on the markets that you're in. Those are valuable customers that you worked hard to get. And those first 90 days are so critical to keep them so you can get a ROI back on that cost of acquisition. So that's where that 3x cost impact comes. And here's the other big one. Everyone loves ARPU. I do. I think that's one of the things that, most boards look at and GMs, and they're really concerned about that share of wallet. They want to grow that number because across the subscriber base, it really does have kind of a force multiplier to the revenue. And so if you have a systematic engagement model post-installation, we're seeing ARPU growth numbers upwards of 40% over the course of the subscriber's life. What does that mean? It means that you've earned the right, so to speak, to sell them new solutions. You've been engaged with them. You've taken them through a welcome and onboarding journey. You've set an expectation that you care and you're trying to solution for them new opportunities based on the data. And we're going to show a little bit about that in a second. So when you do finally go for the ask, like, hey, we think you might be right for this particular solution, and maybe that's a speed upgrade, maybe that's outdoor Wi-Fi, it could be parental controls, what have you. They're more inclined to say yes. So that's super important. Just really quickly on the chart on the right, what makes up NPS? So when our BIS team looks at this across the whole spectrum, It's fascinating to kind of see a few things here that should be um, to some of you uh, not surprising, but the internet service itself, well, in terms of the overall NPS comment, what drove a higher NPS was about at a 36. Like that's a good number, but it wasn't the key value driver. Price value, interestingly enough, in terms of long-term value to the customer, price is a small component of the NPS, the Net Promoter Score, only at a 3. So those two things are kind of the table stakes. That's the entry point for the customer to sign up and to say yes and to really understand what they're getting into the home. But what makes up the vast majority of the NPS by comment type in those higher numbers is customer service support and overall experience. That's where the post-install process really it manifests long term. So customers are advocates. They'll tell others about you, and it drives that long-term value uh, down the road. So wanted to share that just because I think it's important to establish it's not just about sending welcome packets and calling it good, right? This is a long-term commitment to the overall growth metrics and health metrics of your customers and driving up the value both from an ARPU, cost reduction perspective, and churn reduction. So now that we've kind of set the stage, the strategic imperative going forward is to start orchestrating a journey. And the good news is you probably already do this in some respect today. If not, this shouldn't be uncommon. There's about 5 stages we're going to go over that really starts to set the approach of how you can do this. And it doesn't have to be hard. We're going to share some examples of a 90-day plan and things you can do more midterm, say up to 4 months. And like Manny mentioned, out to a year. And in between those timeframes, there's different values kind of associated to what you can derive from that. And so these are the 5 stages we're going to cover today. Data and automation and operating tools. You got to start with a system of truth. How do you know who those customers are when they came into the system? What experience they're having, and then how you can drive that through the different stages of the journey, from the welcome and onboarding, going deeper into the subscriber data to drive action based on how they're doing, how they're experiencing your service inside the home across the Wi-Fi. Stage 4, looking for those opportunities to communicate, hey, looks like you might be a good candidate for X, Y, and Z. So you can sell in solutions, not just selling in promos. And then lastly, measuring it. How do we know we're doing well? Looking for those long tail measurements of NPS and driving loyalty through moments that matter. So stage 1, let's get into it. Foundational setup is critical. We have to start with some data. After the post installation, you can use your billing system to look for activation date. There's other things that you can do, such as through the Calix Engagement Cloud, looking at like when they got Command IQ. That might be your trigger point. Or when was the Gigaspire turned up? That might be a critical indicator and signal of where do we start the journey? We have to have a starting point, and we want to collect as much information as we can so we can nurture that customer and know as much about them as we can. Next, you got to have some good communication channels. What's going to be the easiest way for you to reach your customers across the various touch points that matter to them? Right? My favorite cliche is meet them where they are. Right? We hear that one all the time. So find simple ways to be able to do this and do it at scale. That's where we can start identifying triggers, automations, building those in to create journey flows that once you set them up, you don't have to do this again and again and again and do those one-offs like Manny and I had to do back in the day, where you're constantly scrubbing the database and you're looking at the billing system and trying to purge all that and figure out who to go talk to next. It's the beauty of where we live today in 2025. The tools are out there, and you can do that at scale. Once you set up the journeys, you can continue to nurture those and build off them. And so this is critical stage 1. Don't do it manually. Have a source of truth with your data, pick your channels, and automate. Next, we are going to ask our friend Wendy Krenner from SC Telecom, who is a hero in doing all of this stuff and has some great examples to share of how she's doing this. And we're going to let her tell her story across every stage of this buyer journey. So, Wendy, thank you again for joining us. Fantastic story and growth success story that you guys have had with SC Telecom across our years of working together. How did you build the foundation, to trigger the right actions to measure everything that you do with your subscriber after that first day of installation?
So first of all, thanks for having me, Joe. I'm happy to be here and share our story. So as you mentioned, we had to look at our tool set and make sure that we had everything in place so we could reach our subscribers quickly and efficiently and, have some automation into those processes. So as you mentioned, we needed the data. Who were our subscribers? We need to look at when did they become our customer? And again, like, is that at the point of install or when you turn the GigaSpire on? We also wanted to look at the user profile and really get to know our customers, know who they are, know how they're using their connection. So for this, we do use our billing software, and then we also use Calix Engagement Cloud. And so by using both of these two platforms, we can really access that data that we need, to reach our customers. As far as our communication channels, we chose to go with MailChimp as our email platform. There's a couple reasons for that. We feel like it's a really easy to use platform. There's also an integration with Calix Engagement Cloud, so it just makes it efficient. There's a lot of automation that can be done. So we chose to do that, and we upload all of our new customers from our billing software directly into MailChimp, and we do that like on a weekly basis. Another channel we use are mobile notifications. So people have their phone in their hand constantly. So this is a really effective channel to use to reach your customers. So we use those, and we do have a personalized app, which is really nice. Another thing we looked at, and I feel like this is overlooked sometime, but your website. Sometimes I feel like people get information on their website and then you kind of forget. So that's really an ongoing process, but make sure you have really strong call to actions. And this sounds really simple, but make sure your contact information is easy to find. Kind of a few things that I think get overlooked. But again, that's an ongoing process. Constantly look at your website and make sure it's up to date. And then for our survey platform, we chose Delighted. We did some research, and Delighted really is an easy platform to use. They have some really nice dashboards. I know for me, I have to present to a leadership team and also a board. So they have some really nice dashboards that you can provide some information internally. And so what we do is we export all of our lists into Delighted as well. So we use that Delighted for all of our surveys, like our NPS, our customer satisfaction. We do follow-ups after trouble tickets as well. So that's a platform we use for that.
That's great. That's great. You mentioned something. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but we're just here to have a good conversation. Your your personalized command IQ, and you're using that as a channel to communicate to those customers. Do you know off the top of your head what your command IQ app attaches in the homes?
We have about a 65%
Oh, that's great.
attach rate. Yeah, but that is something that we constantly work on because it definitely goes up and down. It's a constant education piece, and we really encourage our frontline employees to talk about that app for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And it's such an important tool to drive that efficient and frankly cost-effective communication channel, because you're not incurring those costs. You can trigger those, and it sets up those
Right.
those timely messages without you having to do much intervention.
Right. And I feel like with each release, there's just better and better tools within that app to reach your customers and
Yeah.
communicate. So,
Good point.
yeah.
Good point. All right. Well, good. That's stage one. We're going to hop over to stage two, which Wendy kind of started to get into here a little bit. This is really trying to figure out what's that welcome and onboarding sequence, right? We establish those first 90 days are so important. What's day one look like? Do you have a day one? What about a day two? What about a sequence of communications that brings the user, whether it's through the functionality of the mobile app, in our case, Command IQ, where that's truly the interface with which they get to experience and engage in your service. Yes, the connectivity is important. We want to ensure it's a great connectivity, but it's getting them comfortable engaging with the application. It helps you drive one familiarity with the solution, get them to play with and realize the value you're bringing from the managed Wi-Fi perspective. Everything from running a bandwidth test, setting up a guest network, these types of things. These are the sticky parts that embed your solution in their daily lives. For those of you well engaged into some of the smart home things through Calix, Protect IQ plays a huge part of this in establishing the proof point of network security, and Experience IQ with its content controls and scheduling and pausing and timeouts and age restrictions, and the My Priorities IQ for prioritizing the network. Like, these are the types of things that help you have a conversation with your customer beyond the bits and the bytes and the speed and the price, and allows you to create a journey through stage two. So we're showing a 30-day window. There's nothing to say that this can't be 45, 60 days. There's always something to be said about network security and other things going on. And to Wendy's point about updating that happens inside the app, it allows you to continue to educate them on the value you bring, which is a key differentiator. So one thing I just want to kind of make note of, and I think Wendy, you're going to touch on this, but the Wi-Fi report. So using the data, right? We established the data in phase one. What can we do with it in stage two? So out of Engagement Cloud, there's a whole litany of fields and personalized data that could be shared back to the consumer on their service. And again, it's another one of those great proof points and personalized opportunities to prove out the value that you're bringing that subscriber. So we think that's critically important across the journey to embed that in your communication calendar, whether that's on a quarterly basis or otherwise. Again, it's just another one of those proof points that you have at your disposal to be able to drive that value back into the minds of those subscribers and really prove out what you promised them during that acquisition phase. So, Wendy, I kind of teed you up there a little bit, but what does the first 30 days look like to you in what you do to engage your users?
So after an install, we do send a survey through the Delighted platform about their experience. And this is kind of twofold. So we're receiving feedback on their experience, but it's also proven as a really good channel for them to communicate with us. Again, you mentioned it. It's kind of meet them where they are. And it really surprises me, all of the feedback we receive. Of course, we ask the standard NPS question, but then we follow it up with, why did you give us that rating? And we receive a ton of feedback with that question. And as you mentioned, the first 90 days are critical, because this is really when you're establishing that relationship with your customer. And 70% of customers never contact support before churning. So this is just really an alternate outlet, as opposed to them having to call in and express maybe concerns. Or we get a lot of positive feedback as well through that survey. We also send surveys after both an upgrade and then any trouble ticket, just to follow up and ask them about their experience.
We have a question in the chat from one of our attendees. Says, do you have a tutorial for the app to train the customer on?
Yeah, I'll answer this, and Joe can too. In the electronic content builder, which is a Calix product, They have, I think it's called the product guide. Is that correct, Joe? And it's very detailed and walks through all of the steps that a customer would need.
Yeah, great question. And we do. So that's another a great thing about what we try to offer is our true, end-to-end commitment, and that even extends into the subscriber-facing materials on product knowledge and how to. So Wendy mentioned the consumer product guide. That's a great one. Takes really the customer through all of the key functionality and even goes into some of the advanced features, but does it in a tasteful way so it doesn't overwhelm them. And then lastly, through the market activation video platform, are step-by-step guided videos that again are easy to consume, follow along, and works them through both the install process and then again through all of those key features and functionality.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I'm a very small marketing team, so those resources from Calix are time savers. They have saved me so much time. They have an abundance of information and resources to use for your marketing efforts. So just plug that a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. Great
Yeah.
question. Okay. Well, if no other
Um,
questions at this time, oh, go ahead, Manny.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up within that first 30 days. We also send a customer welcome email journey.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we include, everything from how to contact us, how to pay your bill, information on the app, Protect IQ, Experience IQ, all of those things that maybe when they signed up, they were educated on, but at the time of sign up, it's a little bit overwhelming with all of the information. So it's just a great time to re-educate. And that we expand that over about the first 30 days. Every couple days they're receiving another email from us.
It's about consistency, guys. That's a great call out, Wendy, and it being present, being consistent, and not being silent. And I think I'm jumping ahead, but that is such a good point that you bring up. So we will move ahead to stage 3 as we continue to build this journey of post-installation framework execution. Manny, am I at my point yet where I'm handing
Yeah.
this over to you? I know I got to be getting close. So
Yeah.
Manny's going to take us into the next few stages. So off to you, bud.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. And just like both Wendy and Joe mentioned about data, and as you can't tell, data is a big theme here. Being intentional about cleaning up your data and having a source of truth is what leads you to stage 3. This is where you start using that subscriber data to actually drive action. And at this point, the goal is to read the behavioral signals that tell you two things: who might be a risk of churn and where the clearest upsell opportunities are. And here on the left, you see kind of key signals to monitor, things like usage, network congestion events, or even when subscribers try to visit competitor sites. All of those are indicators that help you understand when a subscriber might be getting frustrated or they're thinking about alternatives. On the other side, the same data highlights upside, heavy device load, work from home traffic, streaming, gaming patterns. You start to see streamers and gaming personas focus on using usage during the nighttime as opposed to in the middle of the day, or frequent visits to speed tests. All of that tells you where a higher tier, a Wi-Fi enhancement, or a guided recommendation could solve an immediate need for that type of customer. And on bottom here is highlighted a good example is identifying a gamer household. Like when you see latency sensitivity, device clustering, so many devices in one access point, or even high evening usage, like I mentioned before, you can proactively guide them towards a Wi-Fi enhancement or a performance-focused package before they even go looking for it elsewhere. And there's been independent research done by, I think there was 2,000 subjects. About a third of the subscribers using internet are using it for work, and a third of that are getting it partially or wholly subsidized by their employer. So an example here that creates different opportunities. Checking your data to understand how many subscribers in your footprint are working from home, or partnering with local employers that maybe have headquarters around that and offer tier upgrades or exclusive benefits for those different employers. Those campaigns tend to resonate because the value is clear and tied directly to their daily work. And also, most work from homers, gamers, those who are high users, more than half of them really are the most sensitive to performance issues. So if you can track that, they're going to be most proactive and most responsive to that type of guidance. So yeah, stage three is really about using the engagement insights to see what's happening in the home and acting on it early before the subscriber feels the need to make the change. And Wendy, if we could go to the next slide here, Wendy, you mentioned having the dashboards for trouble tickets. So I sense you do this a lot at SC Telecom. And how are you using that subscriber data to proactively fix issues before they call?
Yeah, we use the dashboards a lot. We do use all of the Calix products to really monitor the usage and behavior of our subs, whether that's Service Cloud or Engagement Cloud. We also use Operations Cloud. So one of the reports that we look at is the downstream and upstream service limit hits. This is a great report to look at, and there are great potentials for upgrades, which obviously can increase your ARPU. And that report is something your frontline employees can pull on a weekly basis and be really proactive to reach out to those customers. We also monitor the Wi-Fi performance. You know, anybody with a 3 or under consistently may be a really good candidate for a mesh. So we use that report for that purpose. There's a systems performance report, and I believe that one is in Operations Cloud, and that'll show you the systems that have repeated reboots. So obviously there's something going on there for those subscribers. So you can be proactive and reach out. You know, we have found sometimes it's just a matter of, for some reason, that subscriber thinks they need to unplug their router every time they leave the house or they go on vacation. So sometimes it's that, but sometimes it is an indicator of something else going on. And then also Manny had, like you mentioned, is the competitor site visits and speed test frequencies. These are really great indicators of maybe unhappy customers. They're dealing with some issues that could result in churn. So again, that report allows your staff to be really proactive and reach out to those customers before you might lose them.
Great. No, thank you, Wendy. And that's a kind of a perfect dovetail into stage four. So now that you get to know your customers, understand their usage habits, how does that turn into real value? And the focus isn't pushing on higher speeds just for gamers or work from homers. It's on understanding what subscribers actually need based on their behavior that you pulled from the previous stage. If you see heavy streaming, gaming, work from home, or security focused usage, that's your signal for the right upsell or cross-sell moment. Things like outdoor Wi-Fi, enhanced cybersecurity, or additional Wi-Fi access points become meaningful because they solve a clear need for the subscriber that they're already showing you, and you might already have that data. Subscriber research, it consistently tells us the same thing. People are willing to pay more when the offer aligns with their lifestyle, whether it's family safety, smart or personalized home managed Wi-Fi control, outdoor coverage, or performance for work or gaming. So having that prioritized network, making sure that those devices have a more consistent and reliable network when you're trying to do the things that matter the most. And newer customers, especially the switchers, are often the most open to the add-ons and pilot programs of different newer features or ones that are differentiated amongst the competitors in your market. And the dashboard on the right is where all this becomes actionable. You can see patterns, device usage in Engagement Cloud, and service gaps in real time, which allow you to tailor offers based on the data instead of just doing blanket promotions. You want to target the ones that are using the internet the most, to ensure that you have a higher penetration rate of those upsell opportunities. So the idea here is really straightforward, using engagement insights to deliver the next right service at the right moment, more tailored for the lifestyle of that customer, with the data that you have. And that's how you'll drive ARPU lift while also strengthening the subscriber relationship. So having those different connect points, instead of just getting messages about their bill, right? You're reaching out to them for opportunities that fit their lifestyle, and they'll gain trust with you. Um, and Wendy, I know you've done some of this. What subscriber experience data are you leveraging to deliver the right upsell at the right time?
Sure. So as mentioned, we do use that downstream and upstream report. I just feel like that was a really good indicator for someone that needs an upgrade. But we also take a look at like their overall data usage in Calix Engagement Cloud, because this alone could be an indicator of someone who may need an upgrade just by the overall amount of data that they're using. As you mentioned, we also really try to target by persona. So we look at the usage by application, and this will really allow you to highlight features that are important to that segment. So for example, at SE Telecom, we know we have a high percentage of gamers. So we can target that group, and they would be a great segment to feature our Wi-Fi 7 product router. Or we can look at subscribers that might be a good upsell candidate for Experience IQ, the parental controls, just by looking at the type of applications they're using or the number in their household. So that's one really great thing I like about Engagement Cloud. Before we had access to that, we were doing, like you said, the mass marketing. We were just kind of throwing it out there and hoping that our message would resonate with a small percentage. We don't have to do that anymore. Through these platforms, we can really target by persona and really personalize those messages for that group.
All right. Thanks, Wendy. Joe, I think
Sure.
you're up.
Sounds good. Back on up. Last stage, everybody. Stage 5. This is where it all starts to come together and measuring the success of that entire journey. And it gives you that, again, long tail, commitment to taking that subscriber beyond the installation through the experience of your service over the course of, again, you define it, hopefully longer than a week, because look, there's so much to talk about in this space. There's opportunities to create memorable moments, everything from anniversary awards, seasonal perks, uh, milestones, updates, releases, security enhancements, the latest and greatest in tech. If you switch from one Wi-Fi system to another one, that's another moment to kind of talk to them about that, all while tracking the success of your retention rates, ARPU lift, the key metrics that you're looking for, that your GM is looking for, that your board is looking for to understand the growth and health of your subscriber base is thriving. And a couple of the best ways to do that is really through NPS. LTV is another great one, lifetime value. If you guys track that, this is your chance to close the loop and start really getting more broad and long term in your thinking, and then building this plan all the way through and then repeating it. Because I think that's the one thing I want everyone to kind of take away is that while there's a start and there's sort of a finish to the installation and a start of the customer's journey, there really is no end. The only end is the one with which you stop at. So continuing to have communication touch points, finding those memorable moments, letting them know how their service is going with things like the Wi-Fi report card or network threats being blocked using like say a Protect IQ report, different things like this start to give you that opportunity to continue the conversation and continue to find value for them through the solutions that you're going to bring to market. So Stage 5, just as critical as stage 1. We got to put the whole thing together. And, Wendy, I know you're doing a lot of this, creating these moments. I love some of the stuff you're about to share to build that loyalty and advocacy and take it all the way to the end, and not just, send them on their way with a great connection after the install. So what are you doing there? And what has this done overall? All these 5 stages are working for SC Telecom and you, and would love for you to share with the audience how that's going and how it's made a difference.
Sure. So after we conducted surveys for about a year, we did use the business insights team at Calix to really look and analyze all of our data. And as you mentioned previously, NPS is highest after installation, and then it kind of starts to decline after that 2 years. Well, based on our findings, we discovered that we had really positive results from respondents from 1 to 10 years, but we found our scores dropped for customers that have been with us for over 10 years. So this really prompted us to look at those touch points that we had with our customers with that high tenure. So we developed and implemented a loyalty program. So on a quarterly basis, we pull all customers who have been with us for 10 years, and we just do some random drawings for prizes and bill credits. And we really try to make a really big deal about this. We promote it on social and email and just really thank them for their loyalty. And that's been really good for us. And then basically for all customers, like I mentioned, we do an NPS survey. This again provides that communication channel for them. But we've also, something unique that we've been able to do with that survey as well is we've used it to increase our Google reviews. So what I do once a month is I pull all promoters and we shoot them an email and just, thank them for their loyalty and just ask them for a Google review. And just by that process alone, we've increased our Google reviews by over 200% over the last year. So that's been really great. We can also use that feedback for testimonials. We do that all the time. I use testimonials on our social media and our website. And for us, that's where we get the best engagement, when we're telling real stories from real people. So that's great to use. As you mentioned, we also do a personalized report card just to really emphasize the value that we're providing to our subscribers. And on that report card, we include blocked threats, their Wi-Fi score. We also include their downstream and upstream service level hits. So maybe they can make the decision on their own that it's time for an upgrade. We also have a referral program. It's unlimited. Anyone can refer someone, and when that new customer signs up, they give us the name and we give a bill credit to the existing customer, which has really been popular. We have found that probably 90% come from word of mouth from friends or family. So that's been a really great program for us. Of course, we're highly involved with community events to foster those relationships with our subscribers. One thing we've done recently, which I love, is we've really tried to empower our customer service reps. So what we did is they each have a budget, a monthly budget, and so they can use it however they want. So if someone calls in and maybe is struggling that month, they're allowed to give that credit without manager approval. And that's been really, really popular. We also encourage them to send out cards. If they're on the phone with someone and their son just graduated high school, send them a card to congratulate them. It's the little things that you do to set yourselves apart. And all of those things have been really successful for us. So what has this done for us? So reduce churn. We're consistently under that 1% mark for our churn. And a lot of our churn, we also track the reason why people are leaving us. A lot of our churn is out of our control. A lot of it is they move out of our service area. So our churn is kept very, very low. We have also increased our ARPU by about 2.8% over the last year. Also, the changes just have allowed our employees to really feel empowered. And as a company, we have a very, very low turnover. So I think all of those things contribute.
Those are great. Yeah, but one of the things that just sort of struck me when you were mentioning all that, specifically on the Google reviews, I just I know a lot of service providers that struggle with that. Do we do that? Do we engage in that? I think it's so critical to the social proof a little bit of and helps validate in the minds of potential prospects who you are, what you stand for, and how you make your customers feel. I can tell you there's another customer out there that cares about those Google reviews, and it's called AI. And if anybody has been doing searches within AI, you know that AI search results pull directly and prioritize directly sentiment based on real people. No longer is SEO quite as important. I don't think it's quite dead yet, but look, that's a vital proof point of showing up in the search of find me the best provider in my area. They're going to look at SC Telecom over somebody else because of those Google reviews, because of the proof points and the validation of real people. So fantastic example, Wendy, and something that everybody could be doing and automating. So, look, we said a lot, 5 stages. This can get heavy quickly. You don't have to bite it off all in the first day. This quick start guide on the screen here is just one example of what a 90-day optimized journey could look like. Something that you all can do very easily, from initially setting up that foundation, working through the several weeks of touch points and how to look for data that allows you to reach out and grow. Uh, by the time you get to week 8, if you're doing things through Calix with Engagement Cloud and other things, being able to send out that first Protect IQ protection report within 6 to 8 weeks of initial service. Great trust point, great proof point, and then beyond. So this is just a simple one. I want to ask you all, I want to take a moment just to kind of ask. We're going to flash up the first poll question, I believe, right now on uh, do you have a 90-day plan? Do you have a structured post-install customer journey? And if so, how long does your journey last? Are you going out beyond the first 90 days? Why don't you take a minute and please vote and tell us how this is going for you. And it says I can't vote because I am a host. I can't skew the numbers.
We have a shy
All right.
audience here, so
Okay.
but we do have one answer.
I love it.
See if anyone else wants to answer.
No wrong answer.
Okay.
All right. Well, there we go. Look. Don't have one? Beauty of that is you know where to start now. We've just taken you through, I think, the first 5 stages. We're showing this first 90 days. Let's get into just a little bit more of how you can take it beyond there. Um, there's different timelines. And so the first 90 days can be very simple to just sort of start setting up the motions. From there, you can go beyond that, go into 4 weeks, start looking at this is really the time frame with which you can start to maximize ARPU. You've had enough communications, you have everything set up, you've been proactively working on your onboarding and welcome and engagement and all this other stuff. And now you can start looking at, really, I think it's along the lines of that stage 3. What are the signals? What are they telling us? And then you can start executing on those signals in ways to start driving that ARPU forward by looking for the upsell, cross-sell opportunities, start delivering that via personalized email. What are the offers? How can I align solutions based on the signals Manny told us that are there? And then providing, a solution could be for a speed upgrade increase, not necessarily. Could be a free upgrade or, trial into any number of different adjacent services that you may want to offer. The barrier to entry can be extremely low here. or all the way up to those performance-based packages, like for the gamer, for the work from homer, or even for the family. That's a little bit more feature-rich and requires a little bit more planning and work, but that can be done too. Really going beyond that 4 weeks, you can start to look at the 12-month calendar and beyond. This is where you can start really drilling into solidifying where are the loyalty touch points. I've done all the steps initially. I'm now looking at, consistently communicating across the mid journey. And now what do I want to do on the long side to start driving that lifetime value? You can start mapping against that, looking to deploy a net promoter score, sending personalized anniversaries, monitoring declining usage and competitor hits, etc. And then leveraging positive reviews, like Wendy mentioned, to be able to automate emails directly to those advocates, and maybe doing direct follow-ups with the detractors, sending out lists to your CSR groups so they can use their budget to kind of, do a little bit of customer care with them to keep that customer happy and turn them into advocates as well. All of this, guys, has real tangible impacts to the business. We've seen, increases in ARPU across that 4-month window. Our customers are taking initiative and building a 4-month plan post installation, really driving that up. Churn reduction, as Wendy mentioned, she's under 1%, which is amazing. We've seen 12% reductions across the entire life cycle by just having a proactive communication plan, reinforcing the value, and just being present, not being silent. And the big one, I think this is one that often goes missed, is lifetime value. This lifetime value is the culmination of almost every metric in the book to show the big picture subscriber health and, frankly, revenue health of the business. The longer you keep the customer in higher plans at higher margins, the more value you bring to the business. So this one's super important. We see a 22% lift on lifetime value from sustained engagement and upsell success over the course of that customer's life. So now's the time. You get to leave this webinar, get in the game. 4 quick steps: establish those KPIs, launch onboarding, enable your triggers, create moments that matter, and continue to refine your customer's experience. So I think you can all implement it. It doesn't have to be hard. Do one thing. Leave this webinar and take our 30-day challenge. We challenge all of you to just do one. Pick one trigger, one upsell, one loyalty touch point, whatever makes the most sense. I like the welcome. I think that's the best place to start. Take it in flow. After that installation, welcome that customer and set them up on a successful journey. If you can do that, you can start building upon it and driving that ARPU growth and loyalty that everyone so wants. So with that, I do think we have one more poll question that we wanted to touch on. Hopefully you guys can come off and vote for this one. Susan, if you want to go ahead and flash that up. We would love to know how we can help. If there's something we could do, we would love to contact you to discuss more about optimizing your post-install journey and ways together we can drive that loyalty and ARPU growth. So if you'd like to learn more from us, we'd be happy to reach out and set up some next steps. Okay. There we go. Once again, if you didn't vote on that and there's still some things you'd like to do to get some help on this, again, Wendy mentioned the Calix ECB, ways you can get involved there. We can submit a success case through our success team and they'd be happy to reach out. You can scan the QR code, that'll get you going there. We'll open it up for a little bit more Q&A. I'm not sure if there's anything in the chat, but we can take a look now. So if yep.
There's nothing in the queue right now.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, wonderful. I guess if that's all, we will wrap this up. I first want to, before we leave, Wendy, thank you so much for sharing your story and always making time for us. I learn something from you every time we talk, so thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Wendy.
And thanks so much,
Manny.
all of you, for joining us today. If you have follow-up questions or you would like to have a one-on-one discussion, you can book a free consultation via calix.com. and look for your email for a recording of this webinar today. Have a wonderful day.